I believe he lived at first up there near Wright's house, where Timmy Sargent lived, for the first couple of years, and then he moved where Dorothy Lothian lives.
But let's back up and for the tape.
That's the Red Gates house.
That's the Red Gates house, yes.
Let's back up and for the tape. Let's introduce you and today's date and who you're speaking of.
He's ready to go?
Yep.
I think it's rolling.
Oh, is it rolling?
Yeah.
Oh.
As soon as you start, as soon as you open your mouth, I was like, oh.
Well, I'm David Samson, my brother, Dr. Olin Samson, and we're here today on beautiful September afternoon, 13th, 2001, to talk about our parents, primarily our father, Dr. Laurel Samson. Daddy was born in Enosburg and educated in Enosburg up through secondary school and went to UVM where he got his medical degree. And after interning out in Indiana, he came to Franklin to settle here in the fall or summer of 1929. They settled at the house, the north end of the street where Tim Sargent currently lives, and many know as the Favreau House. And then my sister Martha was born while they were living there. And subsequent to that, they went up to where Dorothy Lothian now lives, to the old Red Gates house. They were there for a couple of years. And my brother was born while they were living in that house. And sometime prior to 1935, they moved down to the house across the street from the library, where Jackie Luce and Cecil King now live. And his office was moved down there into one part of the house. We lived in the rest of the house. And pick it up, Olin.
Well, that house belonged to Clint Tittlemore at that time, I believe, and we never owned it.
We never did own it.
Daddy used to take care of the family as well as the cattle.
Okay.
Yeah,
As a rent payment?
Rent payment, as I recall. And also, the Tittlemore boys spent some time with us whenever we had bad weather, people at school.
There was a distant cousin relationship between the two families,
right,
on my father's side and the boy's mother's side, Littleton. They were just cousins.
He did have his office up over the telephone building when he first started, I believe. And we always kind of felt it might be there anyway, because Ruth Took used to come out as telephone operator and either call him from the garden or call him as he was driving out, but she really kept track of the doctor for the town.
I hear stories from some of the older women primarily that currently live at the homestead in the carriage house, who most of their children were delivered by my dad, and he was very interested in the OB services as well as his internal general practice. But they tell how, he delivered their children and would often come by either sleigh or buggy. This is Rainville over there.
Skis and snowshoes.
Yeah. And, they would come down and get him, take him up.
He went to Boston I think the only time I left Vermont except to go to Maine was the one time I went to Boston when he was down there taking the sport at College 64. When he came back, he was the only physician, or at least one of the very few physicians who had horses. And so he would get calls to St. Albans, various places, even, I don't think he ever went to Burlington, but to use his horses for a difficult delivery. And the only thing I remember about that trip down was riding on the train and looking out the window at the moon. And sleeping with my mother on the sleeper going down to pick him up.
Yeah, I don't remember any of that.
And that had to be probably in 37 or 38, because I'm old enough to remember it. But I wasn't there. Grandma Green was not with us at that time.
Grandma Green was a lady here in town that we never really knew, and I've never researched who she was, but she was taking care of a Mr. Ducas up in the home where Dick Wright and Kelly Wright lived. When Mr. Ducas died, my father, Grandma Green evidently had done some babysitting for us, and my father offered her a home in exchange for the deed to the house, and promising that he would maintain a home for her. And there was a legal agreement drawn up providing for, in the case that the family could no longer provide that home, there was a stipend that was to be paid to her at that time so she could go and find other means. Just what the economics, the exact economics were, I'm not really sure. And I don't think that's...
I remember Grandma Green from before the time she supposedly came to live with us in 39. I would have been 7 years old. She used to babysit quite a lot, so I think of her as being there as soon as she was really part of the family. And I remember my father working in the garden hours on end.
He had round, one year,
His
he
victory
had,
garden,
everything was planted in circles.
He planted the victory garden. He used to put 3 posts in the ground and hitch a rope to his cultivator and go around those posts. And then he had all his vegetables planted. Everything was in circles. And it was his victory garden. That was probably in 43 or 44. We were old enough to
work in the garden.
Work in the garden. We were old enough to pull weeds, I know that.
He was very much involved in the scouting here in Franklin with the boys that were older than you, I believe.
Right.
The Howard Umsteads, the Charlie Gates of the other Gates family, not of your line. And some of those boys have told me, or those men have told me, how they used to drive my dad around and be his chauffeur because he would be tired and they would be his chauffeur. I'm sure that was connected with the scouting kind of thing.
I can remember going over to the scout. I was always included, even though I was a Cub Scout and I was quite young. They'd set up 3 teepees over there in Riley's Bay.
Sandy Bay, yep, okay.
What we call Sandy Bay. And the scouts would camp there and do all their merit badge work there. He was also very much involved in the church, and I can remember having to sit down in the front of the church when he was preaching in August, and I was told that I must not go to sleep because I had been known to go to sleep in church. But do you remember him preaching?
I don't, but I came across one of his sermons, or parts of one of his sermons, when the 2 churches were separate and they were trying to bring them together.
Angered at some of the people that didn't want to buy the grader because our
he
roads
wanted
were,
to.
He wanted to. Oh yeah, he thought that was the best investment. You know, we had that old 4-wheel
Are we
drive.
on,
Yeah, just started again.
Wow. The wings, and he was very
remember that great big
much
old,
in favor of the grader.
remember that great big old snowplow with the house
With the
on the
wing.
back
Remember
of
we
it?
used to ride on
Yeah,
that?
right.
Go
But
out.
coming back to that, he was also on the faculty at the St. Albans Hospital for the School of Nursing.
Right.
And the select man here, school board. The other thing which I sort of remember is he, I believe, to my understanding, some of his payment was in trade for goods, such as turkeys, and I can remember going down to one of the farms on the Gore Road, I believe, which was one of the turkey farms, and we always got our Christmas and Thanksgiving turkeys down there, as I recall. And they probably were given to us in exchange for his service.
Right. He never kept any books of what people owed him. He kept records of what they paid him. Because by the time before he finished practice, the income tax had come in. But I remember when he died, people would come and say they owed all their money.
But there was no record of any.
There was no record anywhere of what they owed. And but I know that during the war, we always had butter and eggs. People, I mean, he got paid in farm products, which he used to have stamps for. But of course, they always gave him things, you know.
I can remember we never lacked for gasoline.
But he wouldn't use it.
He didn't use it, but
he always had
essentially had gasoline.
Plenty of tickets. Yeah. He had plenty. Well, because the doctors were considered. He could have all the gas he needed. But one year we didn't go to Maine. Usually he went to Maine. The family went to Maine for a day over, a day there, a day back. I guess about 3 days. And I remember 1 or 2 years we didn't go, and even though he had the gas availability, he wouldn't go. He wanted very much to serve in the service, but they wouldn't take him because he was considered essential.
One of the things that
Wilford
Rainville always would tell me if I say, he said, I remember your dad and Oscar Riley and I went down and tried to sign up for the service. Back in, must have been 42, I think it was.
Probably 42, when it first started.
They were all born the same year, so they were all the same age.
But I can remember going up on Rice Hill we were watching the planes coming in from Canada.
Oh,
you remember that?
No, I don't remember
He was
Civil Air Patrol type of thing?
That was, we were supposed to be observers of, whether anything crossed the border. But I don't remember how long they did that. I can remember the shades in the window. You remember
I can remember darkening, pulling the shades on the air radio.
And he was
an alert type of thing.
He was adamant about that. He wanted to be sure that we did everything we could. We painted the headlights halfway down on the car. Only had half a headlight.
Why was that?
Huh? So it would shine as much light.
So it wouldn't shine and show any activity on the ground.
One of the ladies in town told me a couple of years ago, she was reminiscing about Daddy, and she thought that when he died that she would never be able to have any other children without him. And I guess it was the delivery of her 4th child, which in the winter time, he had decided that she needed to go to the hospital and not be a home birth. So he took her to St. Albans. I guess time was going on, and he finally decided that she was not going to deliver that night, and so he told her that he was going home. And she politely informed him that if you go home, I'm going home. And so Daddy bedded down there either at the hospital, or he had a brother-in-law that lived there in St. Albans. But this woman would not. It was Ethel Magnet that was telling this story. She would not let him go home without her.
But he loved to fish and hunt. And I was fortunate in the sense that I was older than David, and I got a chance to do all that with him, whereas by the time you were old enough, he was sickly and didn't do that much. But I can remember so many times getting up early and going trout fishing, and he always had to be back in town by 8 o'clock or so, but we'd go and we'd always have a frying pan, and he was very much a law-abiding citizen, but if he badly hooked a small trout, back then you could not keep a trout under 6 inches, and if the trout was badly hooked, he'd drop it in his boot top. And we'd have some bread and butter, and we'd fry up those small trout. But he'd never let me keep one. If I badly hooked one, I couldn't keep it unless I was right with him. Then he would take it.
Are you teaching your grandson those same rules?
Well, yes and no. we, we don't fish with barbless hooks yet. But, I can also remember my mother coming to get us when we'd go to your house when it was John Wood's house, and park the car and walk down through the field and put the decoys out on Wolf Point. And then we had little pup tents there, and I'd crawl in the back of the tent and go to sleep because we'd do it before daybreak, and then he'd wake me up just as soon as it got light enough to see the ducks coming in. But I don't remember whether we ever got very many ducks, but I remember that my mother would come over and somebody would bring her over, they needed him, they'd go over and they'd blow the horn on the car, and we'd pick up all the decoys and go home, and he always...
Was there that signal? I can remember in later years there was a toot, 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 or something like that. It was sort of a family signal. Was that something she would...
code.
Oh, was it?
Signal,
okay.
Yeah.
Never made that connection.
There was so many times in our lives that his medical practice interrupted a little bit, of our lifetime. But when my mother was down to see me, and I had a family practice in a much larger town, and the first time I had been in practice only a couple of years, 2 or 3 years, and she said, your father didn't see as many patients in a week as you see in an afternoon. But of course, it was so much different. He wasn't needed a lot.
He went to house call.
Oh, yeah,
his time was spent going back and forth to the house
calls, and he would do things, but he didn't have a lot of patients because there are not a lot of, there weren't as many things as you could do then as you can now. But
well, you have to go back to the doctor today just to keep their pockets full,
that's
whether
right.
they need to see you or not.
And we used to keep track of what you owed us too, and he never did. But I can remember one time he promised to take us to Snow White, and Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs, and I was supposed to take a nap in the afternoon, and I told my mother, Daddy never can go, and well, I'm not going to take a nap. And naturally, he went that night, but he was a very discipline-oriented man, and my mother said I could go, but he said I couldn't, and I stayed home. But he taught me a lot of things.
Probably a lot more than he taught me, just because of the age.
He didn't get the exposure. But I can remember in 46, after the war, he got the first Ford in northern Vermont. Hungerford got the car for him, and as a country doctor, he needed transportation. And I can remember the excitement when he got that new car, but then that fall...
Was that the car that we ended up with when he died? That was the car we had until Mother left town?
Right. And I can remember he used to always go deer hunting, and we'd go, and he'd go for 2 or 3 days down with the men to hunt. In White River Junction they hunted, but we'd go around here sometimes. He'd take me, and those last couple of years he didn't have any strength. He couldn't walk. And I can remember going up just beyond, the house at the top of the hill going toward the lake there. It used to be a painter used to live there.
Where Foster Lasser used to live?
Yeah. Well,
no,
right on top of the hill.
Oh, Delbert Wing's.
Delbert Wing's house. We'd go just down around the corner there, and he'd send me up in the woods to go hunting, and he'd just walk up a little ways and he'd sit down. And he just couldn't do anything. In the last fall, I don't think we hunted at all. But he had a good retriever. You remember Sanko?
Oh, I remember Sanko.
He really loved the dog, and he enjoyed the outdoors. But he also loved his work. You got any other questions that might rattle a...
One of the reasons that your dad's name came up is because we were, as a way to get going, we picked a theme to get started on. The theme was the music history in Franklin. And somebody told me that your home used to host a
That's right.
Yes.
Every
Sunday afternoon.
Very,
Sunday.
very often, Sunday
Yeah,
afternoon,
Sunday
and some
afternoon.
evenings too, that there would be the Elton and Ruth Pratt, the R.D. Gateses, I think who some of the other musicians were in that generation.
they come down, my mother played the piano,
Daddy played.
and my father played the violin or the clarinet or the trumpet. What else did he play? He played
Well,
several instruments, but those were the ones he
Right.
played most of. But mostly the. Well, I think he liked the clarinet as well as any of them. But he used to play the violin in church. He played violin solos in church. You must remember some of those.
Yeah, and we have a picture of him when he was probably 6 or 7 years old with the violin.
Right.
Very formal picture.
But he had an infection in 41 or 42. I don't. Must have been in 42 when his finger. It never healed, and they ended up having to cut it off. And that was because of his leukemia. But at the time, I'm not sure whether he found it out then or he found it out right afterwards. But anyway, they had cut his finger off, and he couldn't play his clarinet because his key, he couldn't reach the key. So they built him an extension on his clarinet key.
Yes, I remember.
That was made especially for his clarinet so he could handle that key. And it was, I think it was after that he went to Montreal and made the diagnosis. He made his own diagnosis, but he wasn't sure.
But in addition to the music, our home was always the center for, I can remember the adults playing cards and small card parties there.
Yeah.
And of course,
Tom and Helen Hubbard.
Right. And the
Hammonds,
Hammonds.
Dolph and
The Hammonds.
the Hammonds.
And I think
And they would have 2 tables of bridge. They played bridge mostly, or 500. I guess they played a lot of 500.
But
he
our
taught
home,
us how to play
right.
bridge and chess.
Our home was sort of the center too of the kids in town. I mean, we were right there in the middle of the town. Of course, the patients would come in the evening hours, but the kids would be playing in the yard.
You recall the night that we went sliding, and he stepped on his line that he had on his sled. He was running with his sled, and he stepped on the line that was dragging, and he went down and smashed his face.
No, I don't
recall
remember
that. I was probably, well, you were probably too
Would
young
that have
then.
been up here on Highgate
We were
Street?
going up to Highgate. He came right out here, out of the house, and was going to slide down here. And you know how you used to run with your sled and get a start. And he ran down and dropped. But before he dropped, he stepped on that and he fell down. We didn't go sliding that night. But he did a lot with the kids.
Do you remember the Christmas morning when he went down to Morse's line in the car to see a patient and ran in the ditch, smashed the car, came back so mad?
I don't think I remember that.
Dinner got interrupted because, as it very often did.
You're right.
And he took the car and went down there and went into the ditch, went off the road, came back disgusted.
What are some of your outstanding memories of your life being a child in the home of a country doctor?
The interruptions of meals. There was no question we always tried to eat as a family, but very often he would have to get up and go see somebody in the office or out on an office call. But I think, without question, most days we started eating dinner at night as a family. Lunchtime, of course, we were at school, and lunch was much less likely to be eaten as a family.
We always waited for him to get home, but
then
so many times he'd
get home, but then he'd leave.
Right.
Did you ever have any kind of assisting duties or preparation?
You mean relative to the medical practice? No, my mother worked. My mother was his.
Well, he had diners.
Well, but not in the office.
No.
He had a cousin of his who, or a second cousin, who was his nurse, and he would place in different homes where there was a patient that needed, and in connection with childbirth as much as anything.
Mostly she helped him with childbirth, I think.
But
He didn't have anybody in the
really,
office.
there was nobody in his medical office other than my mother, and that was primarily answering phone and welcoming patients, I think.
I don't ever remember her staying in there except to walk in and answer the bell.
Well, I don't.
I mean, I don't remember her sitting
No,
in
I
the
don't
office.
think. I don't. Well, there wasn't room. I mean, you had the small examining room, which is
Right.
the corner room in the back, and that first little room when you go in this side door was his desk, his waiting room. The big room in front wasn't part of the office. And then he went down a little hall, and there's that back next to the kitchen was what we called the cold room. That's where he kept all of his medicines. He had bottles and bottles of medicines. Because in those days they concocted their own medicines, didn't they? Somewhat.
Well, he
They
mixed his
their
own medicines. He always had 2 bags in the car. One was all his medicines, and the other one was his OB bag. And the OB bag had the ether in it,
which
and I always hated that smell. The ether smell. I mean, the bag always smelled like a doctor's office.
And the car always had the
Yeah,
the
car
smell.
always smelled like it. But
Where did your father learn all those instruments?
Where did he learn the I don't really know who in his family.
kid.
Yeah, but as a kid, but whether it wasn't his mother's influence, I don't think, because he lost his dad when he was 6 years old, and he was brought up by his grandparents primarily.
Where were they from?
Over in Enosburg. They were, and I think they were an old-time Enosburg family. But
In high school, he played in the bands, and he played instruments in high school. Grade school, too,
so,
I guess.
but I don't
But
know
he
what
had to
the
have
early influence for the violin, for instance. I don't know where that came from.
He did not play the piano.
No, I don't think
I
so.
don't
I
think
mean,
he
I
played.
think he could.
Yes, but he didn't play it very
but
much. My
he-
mother played the
Mother
piano. My
played the
sister
piano.
played the piano. But,
What are your memories of the town band?
Sitting up in the bandstand with, 8 or 10 band members probably, sitting up there and having our weekly band concerts. And I see the kids running around today and jumping all over the place, and that's what we did. Our father was up there as the band leader.
and I was fortunate to be able to play with him for probably 3-4 years. And I played-
Yeah, well, you played the trumpet,
I
right?
played
Or
the
the
trumpet, and
cornet?
then I played the baritone, and I played the baritone in college, but I didn't really play very well. I made like I was playing. when you get to a college band, they got a lot of good players there, and I remember my father knew the director of the band down there, and of course my father's been gone for 2 years then, and I was fortunate to have people that knew him down there, but when I played with my father here, I played the trumpet and then the baritone, and then I played the cymbal. And that was very easy because, well, Weed was involved with the band some too, my father. And if you played the cymbals, they always looked at you and nodded when you were supposed to clang them, because you're not supposed to clang them out of turn.
Riley probably could relate to that as a band member, right?
Seen that happen, yeah.
But you just had to watch the director all the
Right.
time, much more so than the trumpet player or the other person, But he loved his music, and my mother was involved in the church as much as Dad. But my brother was active on Halloween night a couple of times.
Well, we're talking about Daddy,
Oh,
not
all
about
right.
me.
Yeah.
Oh, these are Franklin memories. These
Oh,
are
they're
so-
Franklin
Go ahead.
But he was
I came home from Boston just going into enlist in 1953. My night before my birthday was Halloween, of course, and Arthur Lothian and I were in my dad's car, and we had a hay wagon behind us to take over to school to put up on the fire escape. and the state police stopped us, and I did not have a registration or a light or something on the wagon, and they cited me. And so that Monday I went to court. Arthur escaped everything. He was in the car, and he was just as much to blame as I was.
Why, he wasn't driving, right? Yeah, but...
that was after Daddy had gone, fortunately, from the standpoint of the trouble.
He always took the gang skiing. Every winter he would take us all to Stowe. Probably twice, I would say. 2 or 3 times we'd go to Stowe, and he would take...
You have to go around through Johnson to get there.
Yeah. And he would
go
take...
over the mountain.
Well, Sally Gates used to go, and Marilyn, Riley go, Martha, you and I, but my father would pile us all in the car, take us up there and ski with us. And he used to ski a lot in the pastures around, and we
broke his leg.
Group of kids.
Broke his leg
Right.
skiing in the past.
Group of kids, we'd hike up, with him, and then we'd ski down, and he broke his leg probably in 42 or 3, I don't know,
Something like
sometime
that.
along in there. But after that, we were never allowed to ski in the pasture. We used to ski down in Lloyd's meadow, Lloyd's father's meadow, where Elman had his trailer and where the deer are now. He'd take us down there, and we'd hike up and ski down, and we'd make...
See, I don't remember skiing there. My skiing was all up here in back of Dix.
Right.
Yeah.
And he'd take us skating, take all of us skating. He really liked to be outdoors. And he had time. He was a busy family practitioner, but busy in the sense he was on call all the time. He never took any time off except when he went to Maine for 3 days and when he went to deer camp for 2 or 3 days. And Hinman and Dr. Judd and Dr. Hinman in Enosburg would cover him. They never covered each other except for times when the other one had to be gone.
I remember our summer vacations were always timed between births.
That's right.
I mean, he knew pretty much when his patients were due, and you had to squeeze in that time so that he wouldn't be away.
But we lived at the camp in the summer, and he drove
without electricity, except for the last year he died. We lived over there for all my 12 years. That was just kerosene lanterns.
All kerosene lanterns, and we lived all summer. We used to move over there after school,
right after school, get up back
stay there until Labor Day. And
we had telephone, but no electricity, no running water.
And we'd always, I can remember him putting a cake of ice on the front of that Model A40 ad, or whatever it was. I had the pumper out. And put it on, and it would melt some on the way over, or somebody'd come to the office and he'd already have the ice out of the sawdust, and then he'd come out, and I can remember one time the cake melted down quite a lot, and he was very upset that he lost his half a cake of ice. But
those were the years when they cut ice on Lake Carmine and stored it where Cecil and Jackie have a garage now. That was an ice house, and our ice was stored in there in sawdust.
he loved to take care of his strawberries, too. His raspberries.
Raspberries.
He had a raspberry patch, and he loved to work in there in the summertime.
But he was a mentor to a lot of the boys that were just a little bit older than you.
Yeah.
The Howard Umstead age kind of thing. He was really Richard Benjamin. He used to talk about it. He did an awful lot for those guys.
Who was your mother's family?
My mother's family, actually her father's family came over from Quebec. I think the boys were all probably born over there. But she was born, her father was a itinerant preacher, is that what I want to call it?
He was
in the
a
Midwest.
medicine man and an itinerant preacher, and they were out in Illinois.
Illinois when my mother was born.
Ceylon, Illinois, when Mother was born, and she told him that he was going to go back to Montgomery, and he was either coming with him or going alone or something like that.
His wife, right.
It's not my mother, but her mother told him that he had to quit roaming and settle down. So he came back to Montgomery first, and then went to Enosburg and ran the jewelry store. Right?
And then into St. Albans, right? They had a jewelry store both in Enosburg. But she was born out in Illinois, but probably when she was 6 or so came east and went to school. They were in the same class at Enosburg High. They graduated together.
Were they childhood sweethearts?
They were high school sweethearts.
Yeah, I mean they.
Oh yeah.
During high school. That was my memory, but I wasn't sure. I wasn't there.
How long did she live?
She lived to be 91. She died in February of 93. I guess she would have been 91 that fall. And Daddy died when he was 46. So she was a widow for about 50 years, 40 some odd years, 45 years.
And you had your siblings?
Huh?
Can you describe the
rest of our family, Martha, our sister Martha, who was the oldest, went on to become a nurse, a registered nurse, and had a very successful career in the Krause Hospital out in Syracuse. Got into the educational department there. Retired, and then continued to volunteer and work with both the churches and the hospital out there before she died 2 years ago. But she had a high school sweetheart here, your Uncle Jeffrey, or your husband's Uncle Jeffrey, and she were destined to be partners for life, I think, at one point until he died.
He died in the fall. My father died in January.
He died in December.
Jeffrey's mother died
in March or something like that.
Vera, Paul's grandmother.
No, yeah, your Paul's
grandmother died in that March.
So they all
that was
He died December 27th.
Jeffrey did, yeah, something like that. Then my father died January 27th, and your grandmother died, or your great-grandmother died sometime in March, I think. But it's my understanding that Jeffrey was one of the first non-family members that Daddy confided in that he was also sick.
I didn't know he was sick, did you?
No.
Never knew he was going to die.
When Jeffrey was in the hospital, I think I got that information from my Aunt Marjorie. I think Marjorie was the one that told me that.
Dick Davis told me.
Yeah.
But the town was, they went down and gave blood for him. He had several heavy transfusions because that was the only treatment back then for leukemia. The town would, several times, a group of them went down and gave blood so he could get blood. And, so everybody seemed to know but us. My mother didn't know until she found him checking his blood one time. At least that's the memory that I have, but I only knew that years later. But he didn't tell my mother until about 6 months before.
He told his sister-in-law. He told Aunt Doc. He told his sister-in-law.
Right, told his sister-in-law. They never told her mother.
I guess one of the things I remember as a result of his death, I like to quote Hillary Clinton, who said that it took a village to raise a child. There's no question in my mind that this village raised me, because he died so young. Really, I think that the uniqueness and the cohesiveness of this village. And they really took me under their arms. And me and Hewitt, we were the same age, both lost one parent. We were 12, 11,
The village certainly helped me also. They tolerated a lot of nonsense from me.
What are some names?
Some names of the people here in the village. Well, you've got the Henry and Mabel Jetty, which is Madeline McDermott's mother. You've got the Ethel Magnet. You've got the Lothian, the Earl and the Cassie Lothian. Those are the parents of the kids my age that really looked after me. And of course, you've got Ruth Toof that was always in the window there and knew pretty much what was going on everywhere.
Paul likes to tell about calling the phone company and
Finding out where somebody was.
you call for somebody and say, no, he's not there, he's over here.
Yeah. Well,
He was watching,
that's
yes.
happened to me. I remember when I had a fire home in Boston, or a break-in, I guess it was. And my friends down there who found out about it called up here to tell me about it. And no, he's not over at camp. He's up here having supper. So they call up there. But and then of course you've got the Hubbards. The Hubbards were very close to the family. But and you know another family name that comes to mind was Henry and White Street or White Street. And Henry and Anna White. So they had a couple of girls my age.
Yeah, I went to work on the farm when I was 13. I went to George Truex's. And he was very good to me. And I worked there for that summer. The next summer I worked at Hoskins. And then I went to work at Pierce's. And I worked at Pierce's for 3 years, I think. And then
Well, I spent a couple of summers with Olive Weston over on the Charlie P.B.J. Mullins mother. And then I went to the Pierce's. I spent...
And Martha Toll was always very good to me. I was good friends with Guy, and I always had a bed there whenever I wanted. If I came home from college, see when the summer that you went to
Summer
the
after
Air
high
Force.
school, right.
You went in the Air Force, and I went to California.
She broke up the home.
Mother moved to Boston. I think a lot of people still kind of thought of us as part of the village because of what my father had done for everybody. And I think they always...
The other thing I remember is Daddy used to keep his car over in Benjamin's garage during the wintertime, so it would always be warm and would start if he got called out in the middle of the night. This is where Mark has the body shop over there.
Right. I'd forgotten about that.
The car was always in the garage.
Would you retell your smoking story that one night?
Smoking story?
Your father.
Oh,
Your
did
mother's
he?
reaction
Well,
to
he
your
smoked
father's-
probably 2 or 3 packs a day, but he didn't smoke all the cigarettes he lit. I mean, he was, when the phone was, you mean what I told you before?
Well, the ashtray.
Yeah, the
smoking
ashtray.
outside of church.
Right. When he smoked, he had a brass ashtray with some places you could lay a cigarette, and whenever the phone would ring, he would lay the cigarette down, and when he got off the phone, the cigarette would always burn out. And if it was long, I'd look at it, and I'd think there's going to be some long cigarettes in the trash tonight. I better, because I was secretly smoking, and that was when I was probably 12 or 13. That was a couple of years before he died, 2 or 3 years before he died. He knew that I smoked because he caught me out we used to make syrup, and my father used to drive us around and help us gather the sap, and he came out to the tent one night. Merriman Lothian used to be just enough older, so he'd come in and he'd have cigarettes. So we, Robert Dronlow, but anyway, we got caught. He caught me one night. I never said a word in there. Never said anything in front of the other guys. We all scurried around and put him out. But it wasn't long thereafter he had me smoke a cigar and had me inhale a cigar, and I really didn't like that very well. But he said, you just ought to know what smoking's all about.
And yet he continued to smoke.
Oh, he continued to smoke, but he didn't think kids should smoke. He thought it shortened your growth. He thought
Stimulate growth?
Well, I don't know. He believed that it was bad for kids. I don't think he cared whether the adults smoked or not. But then you were saying about church when my mother was deathly against smoking, and Strickland was the minister, and as soon as they would finish church, they'd come out on the front steps, and my father and Mr. Strickland would light up a cigarette. And my mother would be angry at him almost every Sunday. She would say something about that. You know, she wished he wouldn't do that. Why doesn't he wait till he gets home? But it was just something that was a social thing back then, much more so than it is today. It's almost antisocial today, which is a good thing also.
Which church was your family affiliated?
The Methodist part of the Federated Church. They were staunch Methodist, I guess, although my mother was raised a Baptist.
And she ended up
became
going
a
to the church,
Baptist, and then she went to the
nearest church that she could get to,
right,
where
yeah,
she was in
where-
Boston. They had to walk to church, so she went to a
Baptist
Baptist church there.
So yet you were raised playing cards. And
Oh, yeah.
DeForest Manley was telling us how he was really forbidden to participate in all of the activities.
No, cards and dancing were part of our lives, even though we were Methodist and Baptist and everything background. Even my grandmother. Of course, my grandmother, I'm not sure was that much of a church person. His
She
mother.
was before her time.
She was quite the lady.
Yeah. But she lived with us for how many years?
Oh yeah, I mean she played cards.
Yeah.
She liked
Oh, yeah.
activities.
Were you fellows attendees of the pavilion dance?
The dance, oh yes, when it was on the inside of the curve. You know, as you go around the curve there at Miller's Corner or whatever it is, the dance hall used to be on the inside of that curve. That was after it was over at the lake shore. Thursday night dances were all summer long. I can remember the first year after he died, and I spent over at Olin Samson when our mother went to summer school to regain her teaching certificate. Olin would not let me go to the dances.
She didn't let you go?
No, the second year, my current sister-in-law, who had a license at that point, I used to go sometimes with her because she camped on the lake before. This was before my brother even knew who she was.
Right.
And I would go with her sometimes.
The only reason I married her was because she was so good to you.
Oh, because she was so good to
Yeah.
But, the dances, and somehow...
But I don't think Daddy ever played in that dance band. I don't ever remember him being
I certainly don't, but
in the band.
do you
but he played
remember,
with all those
do
people.
you remember when it was across on the shore of the lake? You probably don't remember that.
I don't think I
No,
do.
I don't
think.
no,
I think
I
we
think
were
that-
too
I
young.
think that
I think we
was
were kids.
the
Because
Guy Lothian in that generation.
Right. They were.
Howard Umstead.
Maybe he played in the band then. I don't know. But he played
what-
with Weed in various places.
but,
I don't think. I don't remember him ever.
Peck from Edithsburg that just died a couple of years ago, he always told me that Daddy went to Washington with the UVM band and marched in Calvin Coolidge's inauguration. But I never heard him
proven that.
talk about that. But Harold Peck swore that my dad was part of that group that went down there to the inauguration, and that he would have been in college at the time. Coolidge going in 23?
So he played in the band.
And
he
that
had
was
his
when
own band
that's when
and
Daddy
he-
was in college.
Unfortunately, I did not have his photographic memory. They said when he was in medical school, he had his own band, and he never studied, except the night before the exam, he flipped through the pages, and he had a photographic memory, and he could remember everything. But
Neither one of us inherited.
no, I'm afraid not.
My
But that
sister may
must-
have come closer than we did, but
Yeah, she probably did come closer. He was.
your daughter may have skipped a generation. Your youngest daughter may have some of that.
My granddaughter may have more than my daughter.
Lindsay?
Who knows? They're all. Some of them are smart. Some of them are not so smart. But they're all good. They're all good.
Well, yeah.
Do you have memories of some of the other, you mentioned these two other...
Well, Paul Gates, your grandfather-in-law, after Vera died and my dad died, I can remember he taking Hugh and I on Sundays and joining the Green Mountain Club out of Burlington and hiking in the small mountains across on New York State or here on Sunday afternoons and having a great time. But I do also remember the time that he was great at sending boys off on adventures, if you will, and he let Huey take the train from here over to the Lamoille Railroad and over somewhere, what, Orleans, would that be where the train would go?
Could be.
And no, I couldn't go. They wouldn't let me go without supervision. But my recollection is that Paul sent Hugh on that trip. I think that's, I remember when they dug up the street, that was the year after Daddy died, that they paved this street out here.
Yeah.
They dug it all up that summer. Put the pavement in from what about where R.D.'s Gates is. I don't think it went up the hill initially.
No. Just
Down
by
down
R.D.'s, down to the end of town, I think.
That would have been in the summer
I
of
remember they
1948.
dug that way down
They
very
dug,
deep.
yeah, big, big,
hole.
yeah, big
4
hole.
feet deep, and they filled it with rocks, whatever.
Any memories of Mr. Reed?
You took music lessons from Sterling, right? Trumpet lessons?
Yes,
From
in
Sterling,
St. Albert.
yes, in St. Albans.
Yes, I did. I didn't take them I took them a couple
Well,
years, then I wanted to play the
I'm
baritone.
not even sure I took them a couple years, but I do remember trying to play the trumpet and insisting I didn't like to practice. And Mother was not strong enough disciplinarian to make me, and
Yeah.
so I never did pursue it. But that was it was Weed that was my instructor, I'm sure, for
Right.
those few months that I was doing it. But,
Of course, Oscar Riley used to play the trumpet. What was the other trumpet? I don't remember.
Did Morris play? Doesn't
He
Morris?
played the
Morris?
sax. He played the saxophone.
Okay.
Maybe he played the trumpet too, but I remember him for the saxophone.
The Grange square dancing, was that?
Yes, that was in my day. You know, that was, I can remember I had graduated from high school. So I came back, tried college and came back in the spring as a failure. At least that's what I like to say. And that spring, 8 of us, Mary Colgate, Arthur, Shirley Barnum, Dutch Barnum, myself, I think Jimmy Benjamin. Anyway, there were 8 couples that did a square dance routine at the Maple Sugar Festival in St. Albans that spring. And this was with the people like the Coreys and the Joneses were very active in the Grange. And really were the ones, I think it was Merrill Corey that used to call square dancing. He did. He sort of taught me there. But we had as much fun. I call it round dancing, but the ballroom dancing as much as we did the square dancing, I think, over at the lake. The square dancing we did at the town hall more than at the lake. I think the lake was primarily just the band dancing.
Walter Benjamin talks about the clock.
At the town hall, at the church.
Yeah, is that before your time? Your memories of the clock?
Of the clock being,
Chiming,
well, I can remember the clock working. You mean, would you say, does he remember it being installed?
Chiming.
Oh, chiming.
Oh, chiming. Oh, yeah,
yeah.
right. Yep, you can hear it all over town.
That's what he said.
That's what he said. People complained about it.
Right.
How have the schools changed? What are some of your school routines? Do you remember?
I guess one of the things I remember about high school is Marjorie Doohan taught Hugh and I solid geometry, and Arlene Wright and myself took trigonometry for a half year. Each was a half year as juniors or seniors from Lucille Gates, and I always thought of it as being privately tutored. And there were just the 2 of us. I think I got the weakest link in my secondary education was probably English. Was the weakest link. That we didn't have enough of it.
Margie's at that stage.
Well, but I always,
She got us chemistry,
but I think she was better at some of those things. But she did English lit and everything. And
see, I took typing and shorthand.
I did too.
I thought so. You took all.
But that was
everything they had to offer.
But the English, I mean, I'm a horrible speller, and my grammar isn't the best. And I mean, that was where I think was one of the weak links. Math, I think we were strong in math. I think we were strong in the sciences here.
But we did have to work harder when we went to college than the kids that graduated from some of the bigger schools in the state.
Well, I'm not sure I would agree with that.
Okay.
Except
Well, you were smarter than I was. I
except
can't help it. I had to work harder. I mean, I had to work harder to get. You know, I had to maintain Dean's List, and it seemed like I had to work harder than some of the rest of
Well,
them.
see, I didn't have to maintain Dean's
know
List,
that.
but I did after
When you went back,
after I went back, right. But
Who was their principal at the time?
Kashuba was my principal. I had Powers. Sturdivant was there when I went upstairs, and then Powers, and then Kashuba. You graduated under Powers, right? Myron Powers?
Yeah, I graduated under Kashuba's first year.
Oh, did you? Okay.
I had Myron Powers in my junior year. After that, he died. And then
Alex Kashuba was there.
Alex Kashuba.
And Marjorie Doing was the chemistry and English. Lucille was math and French. Marjorie did Marjorie did Latin, I think, for you guys.
Yeah, Marjorie did Latin and
Latin and English and chemistry.
May Gates did the music.
May did the music. And I'm trying to think who gave us social studies and history. There was a man when I was there. I don't know who was prior to him.
Probably with me, huh?
Probably, I would, suspect that she was the social sciences.
Yeah, I think she did. She was social studies.
But we never.
You were there all the time. We were there.
Bunny Pierce was never there when we were in school.
Yeah, that's right.
Bunny wasn't in school when we were. She was several years prior to that. I can't think of anything else. You think that did it?
Well, that's good.
A lot of wonderful memories.
There's
Thank
some
you.
that aren't so good, but I don't
Which we
remember
won't
any
share,
of those.
but-
I pushed those all off the shelf. They've gone in the back.
He's going to be at the library, so
Oh, what does happen with this? I think you can turn that off.
Yeah, we got a couple minutes left.
Oh, okay. What does happen to this?
well, if I cash the check from the Vermont Folklore Society, this is kind of under their sponsorship, so that we would have the working budget,
Right.
pay matter, paper film, and that kind of thing. Everyone's been gracious so far, but at least to cover expenses, and they keep, as long as we're still under their sponsorship, they keep the original of
Okay.
this, and it will be available for students.
Make sure we get everybody on tape so it'll make it easier to reference later.
Smile, Mikey.
Yeah, right.
Candid
Smile,
camera.
Mikey. I told her. I told her that you had needed to be. She needed not to get upset if you called her Mike.
Still thinking that yet. The idea was to have a copy